I need you to understand something before you keep listening. I have to communicate in codes and ciphers because this platform will silence me, just like those wretched government officials and the ones who control this damned world don't want the truth to be known. They've done it before, silenced me, threatened me, but not today. Today, I'm going to speak. You know about that event that changed the world forever. A day like today, I don't need to say which one, because everyone remembers it. Everyone saw the news reports, the disaster, the deaths. You thought you knew what happened, what was behind it all. You believed it was certain extremist groups, fanatics from the other side of the world. But that's only part of the truth. There's something else, something much darker, something that comes from beyond our understanding, not of this world, not of this dimension. Today, I'm going to uncover all the secrets, the conspiracies, the creatures that move in the shadows of power. Everything comes to light. Music. My name is Robert Hartley Robinson. I was Chief of Staff at the White House until mid-September 2001. Andrew Carr took my place after that. I entered the position on January 20th, 2001, right when Bill Clinton was leaving office and George W. Bush was assuming the presidency. From day one, I knew my responsibility was colossal. My job was to ensure that the Bush administration ran like clockwork, maintaining order and coordinating daily operations, being the bridge between the president and the various government departments and agencies. Those years were far from easy. They were times of critical decisions, moments that would define not just an administration, but the course of the entire country. Every decision we made had to be carefully measured, because what we decided didn't just affect our nation, but the whole world. It was as if we were walking on terrain that few had any idea about. But what I never expected to find was the hidden truth that hit me like a damn freight train in motion. For us, Bush's team, it came as a shock to learn that the previous administration, Clinton's, had maintained agreements with entities not of this world. Serious relationship is a mild way to describe what they had. It was a pact, a dark treaty, with beings that don't belong to this plane of existence. And when Bush came to power, those beings wanted us to continue the deal as if nothing had changed. That was the beginning of the disagreement, and that disagreement unleashed a series of catastrophic events that the world has never fully understood. But I lived it. I lost everything, my family, my faith. And today, after so many years, I'm ready to tell the truth that no one has dared to reveal. It's time for you to know what really happened. The first week as White House Chief of Staff was, on the surface, normal. Each day began long before the sun even peeked over the horizon. My routine was marked by the need to review security reports and policy memos that had arrived during the night. These were documents with vital information that needed to be transmitted to the President with the utmost precision and concision. My job was to filter the crucial from the trivial, to prioritize what could determine the course of the country, and to ensure that the President was aware of every necessary detail. After a series of meetings with key staff in my office, I would walk to the Oval Office for our morning briefing. This daily ritual was essential for setting the day's agenda, discussing immediate priorities, and planning responses to any potential crises. Every second counted. Every decision, every word, could have far-reaching repercussions. My task was to ensure that the President was always prepared, well-informed, and ready to face any challenge. Coordination and clarity were my most valuable tools, and I made sure that every team member understood their role and was aligned with the administration's objectives. The days were filled with endless meetings with advisors, cabinet secretaries, and congressional leaders. Sometimes it seemed like an endless dance, where one misstep could mean chaos. As the liaison between the President and these groups, my role was to facilitate the flow of information, defuse any political bombs before they exploded, and ensure that the President's directives were understood and executed to the letter. Barely a week had passed when something happened. One day, at the end of an exhausting day, I was called to the Oval Office. It was late. Most of the staff had already left or were on their way home. As I approached the door, I noticed that the atmosphere felt heavy, charged with something beyond the usual fatigue. As I entered, I saw President Bush sitting behind his desk. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He looked like he had seen a ghost. The air in the room was charged with a tension I couldn't describe. Bush began with a voice I had never heard before, a mixture of fear and urgency. "You're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you," he said. I approached, my mind trying to anticipate what could have happened. "Sir, what's occurred?" I asked, maintaining my composure. "This can't leave this room," he warned me, his voice dropping to a whisper I could barely hear. "It's of the utmost confidentiality." "Sir, you can trust me," I replied, trying to calm him, though inside my thoughts were overflowing with possibilities and scenarios. It was then, in that moment, when my world and everything I thought I knew about politics, power, and reality began to crumble. It was there that I was introduced to this world of the inexplicable, a world where things were not what they seemed, where conspiracies were not mere rumors from internet crazies, but tangible threats that could alter the course of history itself. The President was visibly agitated. He ran his hand over his sweaty, trembling face, as if trying to find a calm that wouldn't come. He looked me in the eyes, and for a second, I saw a defeated man, trapped in something much bigger than any human being should bear. "I've been visited by some... Actually, I don't know what to call them," he began to say, his voice barely a whisper. I noticed the trembling in his hands. "Sir, calm down and breathe," I advised, trying to maintain my composure. This wasn't the Bush I knew. The President swallowed hard and continued, his words coming out rushed, as if he was afraid to pronounce them. "They told me they are reptilians, from the Alpha Draconis star system, and that they want to continue the Clinton-Southor interdimensional cooperation treaty." I stared at him, trying to process what I had just heard. Reptilians, Alpha Draconis. This sounded like madness. But Bush kept talking, as if each word was another brick in the wall of horror he was building. "Robert, according to them, Bill Clinton agreed to an exchange of extraterrestrial technology and weaponry in exchange for the placentas of women who had just given birth." I couldn't help but let out a nervous laugh. Placentas? Supposedly advanced beings wanting something like that. What would they want them for? But Bush wasn't in the mood for jokes. His expression remained just as grave, like a marble tombstone. "Robert," he said, fixing his eyes on mine, "what I'm about to tell you isn't recorded in any official document. Last night I had an extraordinary encounter." He paused, as if the words were about to get stuck in his throat. "Two individuals. One was imposing, reptilian in appearance, and the other was a man who looked like you until he transformed into another reptile right in front of me." My hands began to sweat. "They showed up at the residence. They said they had come to talk about an urgent matter, the renewal of a treaty, one that, apparently, Bill Clinton signed with them during his term." Each word hit me like a hammer to the chest. How could this be possible? Extraterrestrial reptiles in the White House talking about interdimensional treaties? But Bush wasn't finished. "They made it clear that under the original agreement there was an exchange of information and resources that they consider essential," he continued in a tone that denoted both fear and disbelief. "They didn't specify much, but they implied that our government has provided them access to certain biological resources in exchange for advanced knowledge. They mentioned the word placentas. Robert, they say these are fundamental for their genetic experiments, that they contain stem cells and materials they need to develop their own hybrid technology. I felt the air in the room becoming thicker, almost impossible to breathe. This was far beyond anything anyone on Capitol Hill could imagine. "And here's the kicker," said Bush, leaning towards me. "They want to renew that agreement. According to them, we've had a beneficial relationship for decades, and they expect our administration to continue the deal. They gave me an ultimatum. If we refuse, they implied they might take measures that would affect our country's stability, or worse." The silence that followed was sepulchral. I didn't know what to say. How does one respond to something like this? The president kept talking as if in a trance. I don't know how much of this could be true, but what I do know is that these beings aren't playing around. We need to analyze this with extreme care and decide what response we're going to give. But remember, Robert, this is something that neither Congress nor the American people should know about, at least not for now. There was another brief silence. The president finally told me, "You can go now. I'll call you when I need you." There was nothing more to say. The days and months passed like a somber whisper in the halls of the White House. Every time I looked at President Bush, I could see the weight of that encounter on his face, in his eyes that no longer had the same firmness as before. It was as if a shadow had taken hold of him, a shadow that grew deeper with each day that passed without a clear answer for those beings. One night, 2 months after that first encounter, I was working late, as was usual. It was around 10:45 when I heard a strange murmur coming from the Oval Office. At first I thought the president was talking on the phone, but then I noticed that the words were unintelligible, as if he was babbling in an unknown language. I approached the door cautiously, my heart pounding heavily in my chest. As I touched the door, it opened by itself, a low and prolonged creak that chilled my blood. And then I saw them. They were 2 men of strange appearance, dressed in impeccable black suits and hats that seemed taken from a 1950s movie. They seemed quite ridiculous to me, outdated and out of place. But what disturbed me most wasn't their attire, but the way they looked at me. Although they wore sunglasses, I could feel their eyes fixed on me, penetrating as if they were piercing my soul. I turned my gaze to the president. Bush was sitting behind his desk, but his posture was that of a defeated man. Hunched over, he was terrified. He was sweating profusely, despite the room being cool. His lips were trembling, and he was muttering something I couldn't understand. One of the men spoke, his voice resonating with a cold and emotionless tone. "Mr. Hartley," he said without moving a single facial muscle, "we hope to reach an agreement here with the President. We've been debating a lot about the agreement. I ask that you help the President to enter into reason. Otherwise, we'll have to opt for seeking other resources. We already have a group from the Middle East who are willing to give their lives and obey. They've even offered their women to hand over to us themselves." I couldn't think who this supposed group might be, but his words weren't a simple suggestion. They were a veiled threat. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, a blinding flash filled the entire room. I had to cover my eyes with my hands. The brightness was so intense that I thought it would leave me blind. When I could finally see again, the 2 men were no longer there. I stood in the room, paralyzed, trying to process what had just happened. Who the hell were those men? I thought as I tried to regain my composure. I looked at the president. He was on the floor, collapsed like a broken doll. I ran to him and lifted him up, settling him back into his seat. Bush looked at me with glassy eyes, but there was something else there, something like resignation. "Now you believe me, don't you?" he murmured in a weak voice. "Were they them, the so-called reptilians?" I asked, still stunned. "Yes, Robert, that's right." The president nodded. "But they looked like men." I blurted out, seeking some sense in all this. Bush shook his head, his expression full of horror. "Before you came in, They were two creatures straight out of a nightmare, two 13-foot-tall monsters. I think they can transform into anything at will. My mind was trying to assimilate what I had just heard. This was beyond any conspiracy, any theory I had considered possible. We spent days, weeks debating and planning how to face this threat, but the more we talked, the more I realized that George Bush wasn't willing to give an inch. "I don't want to make any deal with these demons," he would tell me, with palpable disgust in his voice. "I hate their presence, the smell that emanates from their skin. I never want to see them again." And so it became clear. The president had no intention of continuing with the agreement, but he knew, deep in his soul, that these beings wouldn't accept a no as an answer. The tension in the White House was unbearable. The feeling of being trapped in a spider's web grew stronger with each passing day, and time was running against us. Fear had become my constant companion. My mind couldn't stop wandering to thoughts of destruction and annihilation. I imagined those beings disintegrating entire cities with laser beams, reducing our country, perhaps the whole world, to ashes. I was in panic, a cold and paralyzing panic and so I lived for 3 months without knowing what could happen at any moment. The meetings with the president became more exhaustive, more desperate. Trying to convince George Bush to make the deal with these extraterrestrials was like trying to move a mountain with my bare hands. I begged him, I pleaded with him, but he wouldn't budge an inch. His repugnance towards those beings was evident, and his stubbornness could lead us to ruin. And then, finally, they returned. It was Thursday, August 30th, 2001. I was present when they reappeared. This time there were no men in black disguises, no sunglasses or ridiculous hats. What I saw was a nightmare in flesh and blood. Two giant monsters with scaly skin, like crocodiles, standing on 2 legs. The air around them vibrated with an energy I could feel in my bones. They emitted an unpleasant odor, something that, although not overwhelming, turned my stomach, a mixture of sulfur and rotten meat. My eyes tried to capture every detail, the sharp claws, the slitted eyes that glowed with a yellowish light, as if hell itself was reflected in them. I turned to the president and saw him cover his nose with his handkerchief. "Damn it, George," I thought, angry. That reaction could be our death sentence. But before I could do anything, one of the extraterrestrials spoke. Its voice was harsh and deep, like an old man who has smoked all his life. "Mr. President, we are here to discuss our agreement." The accent was almost unintelligible, a mixture of languages I had never heard. Bush, for his part, jumped up from his seat, his face red with anger, and spat on the floor of the Oval Office, a gesture of contempt that made my heart sink. "Dear friends from outer space," he said in a scathing tone, "I'm not going to deal with any of you. Turn around and go back to the hole you came from, and don't come back here again." The silence that followed was dense, oppressive. The two reptilians looked at each other briefly and began to speak in their language. Their voices emitted a guttural sound, like a mixture between a growl and a murmur in an incomprehensible language, something like a dead language mixed with Arabic, with an echo that made the window panes vibrate. And then it happened. From the window of the Oval Office, a flash of light emerged from the sky, so bright that I had to cover my eyes. The light was so intense that it seemed to encompass the entire acre of the White House. For a moment I thought that was the end, that our refusal had sealed our fate, and that everything would be reduced to dust. But then, silence. The light vanished, and the two beings were no longer there. We stood there, the president and I, in the center of that office, as if nothing had happened, as if time had frozen. "This will all be a disaster, Mr. President," I said with a lump in my throat. I didn't know if we had survived by luck or for some other unknown reason. George Bush's decision had lit a fuse that could lead to our destruction. 12 days later, After that fateful encounter in the Oval Office, my life plummeted into an abyss in a way I could never have imagined. That morning I arrived late to work. I had taken my wife to her job, dropping her off on Church Street at 7 a.m. Our 10-year-old son was with her. It was a normal, routine day, but something inside me already felt uneasy. At 8 a.m. we departed for the ranch in Crawford, Texas. We were going to discuss some measures about future actions we needed to take, away from the hustle and bustle of Washington. We were on the plane, and my mind was still reeling over what had happened. It was then that I received the news. My phone rang, and upon answering, my world crumbled in a matter of seconds. Something inside me broke forever. The words were blurry, confused, but I understood the essentials. Something terrible had happened in Washington. My wife, my son were there, in the chaos, in the disaster. Devastated, with my heart beating like a war drum in my ears, I managed to get the flight to turn back to Washington immediately. But as we flew back, my mind already knew the truth. Fear and desperation were turning into pure rage, into overflowing hatred. When we finally arrived in the capital, there was nothing left to do. That place where my life as I knew it had been before, where I had left my family that very morning, was nothing more than a heap of shattered stone, unrecognizable, a pile of rubble that had been my life. I tried to hold back the tears, but it was useless. I felt powerless, empty, reduced to nothing. I couldn't accept the reality. Something inside me exploded. I knew who was responsible for this. I remembered what those beings had told us, their warning, their mention of their new allies. Bush. He hadn't wanted to listen. He hadn't wanted to yield. And now my family had paid the price. Fury took over me, a fury I had never felt before. I wanted to hit the president. All of this was his fault. If he had followed Clinton's treaty, if he had accepted the damn agreement, none of this would have happened. The thoughts consumed me. I was so blinded by rage that my whole body shook. I couldn't bear it anymore. I resigned from my position. Not only did I have to deal with the existence of those repugnant extraterrestrials and their constant threat in my mind, but also with the most devastating loss of my life. My wife, my son. They were all I had, and now they were nothing more than dust in the wind. Only today, 20 years after all that, have I moved to Arizona, a place that is no safer than any other, but far enough away that I can try to forget, that I can try to bury the memories of this bitter life. I know death awaits me, and I've decided that I'll face it here, far from the ghosts of Washington and the shadows of the reptilians. Maybe, just maybe, here I can find some peace. But peace is elusive when you carry the weight of the truth. The kind of truth that would shatter the foundations of everything people believe in. I've spent 2 decades looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, seeing those yellow eyes in every dark corner. The reptilians, they're still out there. I know it. I feel it in my bones. I've tried to piece together what happened after I left. The official story, the one fed to the masses, it's all smoke and mirrors. Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, the war on terror. It's a construct, a carefully crafted narrative to hide the real puppet masters. But I know better. I was there. I saw them. In the years that followed, I watched from afar as the world spiraled into chaos. Wars, economic collapses, natural disasters that seemed anything but natural. Each event, each crisis, I saw their scaly hands pulling the strings. The reptilians didn't need to destroy us outright. They were content to watch us tear ourselves apart, feeding off our fear, our desperation. I've tried to warn people, to spread the truth. But who would believe the ramblings of a broken man? A man who claims that lizard people from another star system are controlling our governments, our lives. I've been laughed at, ridiculed, called insane. But I know what I saw. I know what's real. There have been others, whispers in the dark corners of the internet, people who claim to have seen them too. But they disappear, their voices silenced. I've managed to stay alive this long only because I keep moving, never staying in one place for too long. But I'm tired, so tired. That's why I'm recording this now. This message, this truth, it needs to survive even if I don't. Someone needs to know what really happened, what's still happening. The reptilians, they're patient. They've been here for centuries, millennia maybe. They don't think in terms of years or decades like we do. Their plan, whatever it is, it's long-term. And we're just pawns in their cosmic game. I've spent years trying to understand their motivations. Why the placentas? What could beings advanced enough for interstellar travel possibly want with human biological material? I have theories, each more terrifying than the last. Are they creating hybrids, studying our genetics to find our weaknesses? Or is it something even more sinister, something beyond our comprehension? There are nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, the memory of those yellow eyes boring into my soul. I can still smell that sickly sweet odor of sulfur and decay. It's burned into my memory, a constant reminder of the horror that lurks just beneath the surface of our reality. I've tried to find others who were there that day, others who might corroborate my story, but they're all gone, dead, disappeared, or so deeply in denial that they refuse to acknowledge what happened. Am I the only one left? The only one who remembers the truth? Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if I'm crazy. If maybe the trauma of losing my family that day broke something in my mind, made me create this elaborate conspiracy to explain the inexplicable. But then I remember the feel of the air in the Oval Office that day, the way it seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. I remember the president's face, pale and drawn, as he spat his defiance at beings he couldn't hope to understand. No, I'm not crazy. I wish I was. It would be easier to bear if this was all in my head. But it's not. It's real, and it's happening right now, all around us. I've tried to track their movements, to understand their strategy. It's like trying to see the forest while being lost among the trees. But patterns emerge, if you know where to look. The rise of certain political figures, the fall of others, technological advancements that seem to come out of nowhere, catastrophes that defy explanation. Take the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, a virus that brought the world to its knees, that changed the very fabric of our society. Was it natural, or was it engineered, a tool of the reptilians to further their agenda? I've heard whispers of underground labs, of experiments gone wrong, or perhaps gone exactly as planned. And what about the sudden push for space exploration, the race to Mars, the talk of colonizing other planets? Is it driven by human curiosity and ambition, or are we being herded off-world, like cattle being moved to greener pastures, or perhaps to the slaughterhouse? I've tried to warn people, to open their eyes to the truth. But the reptilians' control runs deep. They've infiltrated every level of our society, from governments to media to big tech. Any voice that speaks out against them is quickly silenced, discredited, or worse. There have been close calls over the years, times when I thought they'd found me, when I was sure my time was up. But somehow, I've managed to stay one step ahead. Maybe they're toying with me, enjoying the chase. Or maybe, just maybe, there's someone or something out there protecting me, ensuring that this truth doesn't die. I've made connections with others over the years, people who claim to have had similar experiences. Some seem genuine, their fear and confusion all too real. Others, I'm not so sure about. The reptilians are masters of deception. How can I be sure that the person I'm talking to isn't one of them in disguise? Trust is a luxury I can't afford. Not anymore. Not after what I've seen, what I know. The world thinks it understands power, thinks it knows who's really in control, but they have no idea. The presidents, the prime ministers, the CEOs, they're all just puppets dancing on reptilian strings. I've tried to find weaknesses, ways to fight back, but how do you fight an enemy that can change its shape at will? That can infiltrate the highest levels of power without anyone noticing. That has technology so advanced it might as well be magic to us. There are days when the weight of this knowledge is almost too much to bear. Days when I think about ending it all, about finding peace in oblivion. But I can't, I won't. Because if I go, who will be left to remember the truth? Who will be left to fight? So I keep going. I keep moving, keep watching, keep trying to warn anyone who will listen. Maybe one day someone will believe me. Maybe one day we'll find a way to fight back, to reclaim our world from these cosmic invaders. But until then, I'll keep running. I'll keep hiding. I'll keep telling my story, hoping that someday someone will hear it and understand. Because the truth is out there, and it's more terrifying than anything we could have imagined. As I sit here in my small apartment in Phoenix, watching the sun set over the desert, I can't help but wonder what the future holds. Will the reptilians finally reveal themselves to the world? Or will they continue to manipulate us from the shadows, playing their long game until it's too late for us to resist? I've spent years trying to understand their endgame. What do they want with our planet, with us? Are we just an experiment to them, a source of resources? Or is there something more, something we can't even begin to comprehend with our limited human understanding? I've had theories, each more outlandish than the last. Maybe they're terraforming our planet, slowly changing it to suit their needs. Perhaps they're harvesting our emotions, feeding off our fear and suffering. Or could it be that they see us as a threat? A young species with the potential to one day challenge their dominion over the galaxy. Whatever their reasons, one thing is clear: they're patient. They've been here for who knows how long, slowly infiltrating every aspect of our society. The changes are subtle, almost imperceptible, unless you know what to look for. But they're there. I've noticed things over the years. The way certain politicians seem to change overnight, their policies and personalities shifting in ways that don't make sense. The sudden advancements in technology that seem to defy our current understanding of physics. The inexplicable disappearances of those who get too close to the truth. There are others out there who know, or at least suspect. I've made contact with some of them over the years. We communicate in code, using old methods that the reptilians hopefully haven't cracked yet. But it's dangerous. So many have disappeared, their voices silenced forever. I often think about my family, about the life I had before all of this. My wife's smile, my son's laugh. The simple joys of a normal life, untainted by the knowledge of cosmic horrors. There are days when I wish I could forget, when I long for the blissful ignorance of the masses. But I can't forget. I won't forget. Because forgetting means they win. It means that everything, my family, my career, my sanity, was sacrificed for nothing. So I keep fighting. I keep searching for answers, for ways to expose the truth. I've compiled evidence over the years, documents, photographs, recordings. Nothing concrete enough to convince the world, but enough to keep the flame of truth alive. I've thought about going public, about holding a press conference and telling the world everything I know. But who would believe me? And even if they did, what then? The reptilians' reach is vast. They could discredit me, silence me, or worse, before I even finished speaking. No, for now, I have to stay in the shadows. I have to keep moving, keep watching, keep gathering evidence, because someday the world will need to know. Someday we'll need every scrap of information we can get to fight back against these cosmic invaders. I've tried to understand their weaknesses. Surely, even beings as advanced as the reptilians must have vulnerabilities. I've studied every encounter, every whispered rumor, looking for patterns, for anything we could use against them. There are stories, legends really, of humans who have successfully resisted the reptilians, people with special abilities, psychic powers that can see through their disguises or even harm them. I don't know if I believe these tales, but at this point, I'm willing to consider anything that might give us an edge. I've also heard whispers of other alien races, ones that oppose the reptilians. Could they be potential allies in our fight? Or are they just another faction in a cosmic war we can't hope to understand? As I write this, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. It's a constant presence, a prickling at the back of my neck that never quite goes away. Are they out there right now, watching me through unseen eyes? Can they read my thoughts, know my plans? I've taken precautions, of course. My apartment is shielded with every type of protection I could think of, from simple aluminum foil to more exotic materials that are supposed to block psychic energies. Does any of it work? I don't know. But it gives me a small sense of security, however false it might be. There are times when I question everything. Am I really saving the world, or am I just a paranoid old man chasing shadows? But then I remember their eyes, those cold, reptilian eyes that seem to look right through me. I remember the president's fear, the tension in the air that day in the Oval Office, and I know that I'm not crazy. This is real, and the fate of humanity hangs in the balance. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The constant vigilance, the paranoia, it takes its toll. My health isn't what it used to be, and there are days when the weight of this knowledge feels like it might crush me. But I have to keep going, for my family, for the world, for the future of humanity. Because if I don't, who will? Who else knows the truth? Who else can warn the world of the danger lurking in the shadows? So I'll keep writing, keep documenting, keep searching for answers. And maybe, just maybe, someday someone will read this and understand. Someday we'll be ready to fight back against the reptilians and reclaim our world. Until then, I'll be here, watching, waiting, and remembering. Because the truth is out there, and someone needs to tell it. As I finish writing this, the sun has set completely, plunging the desert into darkness. In the distance, I see lights moving in strange patterns across the sky. Are they just planes, or something else, something beyond our understanding? I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if I'll live to see the day when the truth finally comes out. But I do know this. As long as I'm breathing, I'll keep fighting. I'll keep telling my story, hoping that someday someone will listen. To whoever reads this, be vigilant, question everything, and remember, the truth is stranger and more terrifying than you could ever imagine. This is Robert Hartley Robinson, former White House Chief of Staff, signing off. The truth is out there. Find it, spread it, and may God help us all.